evening, everyone. Bonsoir et bienvenue. Anine, bonjour, I see your light. Welcome to Versefest Prelude, our first reading of the festival, featuring poets Bahar Arang, Ken Victor, and Pearl Piri. Sidika Demeyer cannot attend this evening. Versefest is Ottawa's international festival of poetry and takes place on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. My name is Jenny Haysom. I'm the Vice President of the Board of Directors for Versefest, and I'm honored to be your host tonight. We have 3 stellar poets reading for us this evening. Our first reader is Bahar Arang. She is something of a Renaissance woman, having received both a medical degree from McMaster and an MA in Comparative Literature from U of T. She's now completing specialty training in psychiatry in Toronto. Where Things Touch, a meditation on beauty, is Bahar's first book, and what a book it is. In her search for meaning, she fearlessly navigates the difficult, abstract terrains of art and philosophy, but keeps returning to the astounding materiality of the world, and indeed the human body. Side by side with the poet and doctor in training, we accompany her on her rounds. At one point, we're even privy to a cesarean section. The OB guides my hands, Arang writes. She hands me a surgical instrument to keep the uterus ajar. And I sweat and watch as she goes elbow deep into this woman. I'm looking into a kind of portal, lush with shades of red, blue, purple. Prepare yourselves, listeners, to enter that portal and to go deep into the beautiful contradictions of being. Welcome, Bahar.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for that really lovely introduction. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm just going to read from 3 sections in the book. So they're not distinct, kind of separate poems, and it looks like this. Maybe that's helpful as I'm reading, that it's kind of written in fragments, and each fragment is separated by closed brackets. So I'm just going to start from the very beginning first. Perhaps my project began when Solmaz Sharif wrote, "My life can pass like this, waiting for beauty." Perhaps my writing here is the articulation of a series of raptures. All the times I appeared to be waiting but was actually searching. My search has changed, though, because I hardly know anymore whether I can even articulate that aporia that is beauty, or if it even wishes to be expressed here at all. And then there is your beauty, a beauty that appears to me rather like the sun, rather like the moon. And by this I mean that every lock of curly black hair extends from its root, reaching beyond itself, light and messy and stubborn. And we might say you have an olive complexion, a chromatic kind of fairness that glows into the night. And there is, somehow, the presence of beauty between us. A beauty that offers more than its playful glimmer, a beauty that opens its arms to us, considers stillness as its impermanent home. We could not rush to capture that beauty. Such an impulse would be its opposite. But here I am idealizing beauty, purifying beauty, as though it's not wrapped up in the mess of desire and regret in which we live, as though beauty does not already reside in a home of fragmented language and memory. Because your ex, the person you dated before me, won't stop calling you. You say you once found them beautiful. You say this with your arm leaning against the windowsill, next to a potted purple hyacinth, a sombor, not quite in bloom, that lives free from doubt or withholding, that knows just what it needs, the sun. But before I go any further, I have this to offer, a touchstone. There's a strangeness for sure, but a sense of recognition too. The moving image is like something that's escaped from the fissures of my own heart. I guess perhaps a wistfulness, but only the wistfulness of everyday life, the poet's feeling that all of us feel all of the time, and a sunset, very slight, casting a yellowish glow over the street, small circles of light reflecting from the car's windows. We watch from a car driving behind two men on a motorbike, riding down the streets of Tehran, one man trying to steady a bouquet of crooked pink flowers and their two long green stems. The flowers might be dahlias, kokab. It's the final scene of Kiarostami's film, Close Up. And we've arrived, I'm sure, at one definition of beauty, a sort of lighthouse, somewhere to start. And then I'm just going to read a little bit from the middle section. When I learned that you're writing a dissertation on freedom, I wondered about the logic between freedom and beauty. Perhaps all free things are not necessarily beauty, but I suspect that all things of beauty are necessarily free. The day after our first meeting, it was still summer, warm sunrise, a fan whirring nearby, but otherwise it was stillness. I can't say I stayed for very long. I saw your face again in the sunlight, and it was half-sleeping, half-hanging pothos plant. I thought of spending the whole day with you until it could be evening again, and we might sit on the porch, cold beers and paperbacks, but I couldn't rearrange you any better even if I tried. An improvised picture, how the hair fell, how the sweat fell, the rhythm of your breathing, covers thrown away, sheets strewn. So I left you in your stillness, your mourning, as one does for sleeping animals. I was equally in love with you, with the window, the fan, the possible paperbacks, and the green pothos I imagined to be the form of your body. I was in love with the ecosystem of where we were, and I only hoped it could love me back. These are the queer love stories that interest me. Encounters of beauty between sunlight and pillow, between summer and stillness. I revise, beautiful things are not necessarily free. Instead, beauty beckons freedom, approaches it, tastes and remembers it, reaching for freedom with tendrils asymmetric and awake. At the hospital, still during my first few months of training, I discussed the size of a toddler's stools with her father. Are they the width of a nickel, a quarter? The child is severely constipated and in great pain. He shakes his head, unsure, at a loss. We try laxatives and dietary changes, but nothing works. He tells us about her fraught relationship to her bowels. She hates having her diaper changed. She hates all our clinical exams, and most of all, she will hate having an enema, which seems to be the only remaining option. The pediatrician explains that the procedure will be quick, she's unlikely to remember it, and afterwards, she'll feel relief. Memory tends to live in provisional places, under fingernails, between creases of the palm, where the spine curves. Our unpredictable behaviors are predictable behaviors, the proximity we permit our lovers, timbre and tone, in the skin and how it folds, what we consider beautiful, what seems like a choice but is not, what seems like an accident but is not, how certain meetings feel like anguish, and others like a wharf facing some other possibility. Our young patient might feel relief, but how and what she remembers, the effect of the memory, this part is less certain. When I go to see her in the early morning before the procedure, I don't know how to speak to what's about to happen, how to express things as questions, how to include her. Her father comes into the room and cradles her against his chest. I feel frozen with anxiety and astonishment, defenseless against the staggering vulnerabilities and dependencies of our little bodies. How we come into being in relation to each other, how swiftly we can slip into violence, how we're all bound up in this fleshy project, love. I asked for beauty, and among pain, bodies in pain, illusions of irreproachability between linoleum floors and white lights is where I ended up. And then I'll just read a little bit closer to the end. We find a place together, and the walls are as yellow as egg yolk or sunlight or the pupils of daisies. We're uncertain about such color. Is it warm or is it garish? Someone cites Maggie Nelson in Bluets. She paints her apartment a yellow of utter rage and says, later I learned that nearly all cultures have considered yellow one of, if not the least attractive of all colors. Nonetheless, she paints everything with it, comes to hate it, and soon moves out. Yellow, for Nelson, is ultimately unbeautiful. Girt on yellow. In its highest purity, it always carries with it the nature of brightness and has a serene, gay, softly exciting character. To this point, we are amenable. Alas, the man goes on. It is, on the other hand, extremely liable to contamination and produces a very disagreeable effect if it is sullied. He asserts that by a slight and scarcely perceptible change, yellow becomes the color of ignominy and aversion. We promptly go to the hardware store and buy $100 of white paint. But that night, as we lie together on our mattress on the floor, we are buoyant in our yellow kingdom. We list all the yellow things we consider beautiful, things other than the walls of Maggie Nelson's shitty apartment. Rice and saffron, turmeric, dawn, where light spills between the mountains as through a sieve, honey poured over cream over barberry, a gold chain with names carved in its pendant, a sunlight of no specific impulse playing in clear streams of water, and you, glowing like alabaster where I touch your skin with my skin. We return the white paint and dwell in yellow, a corner of beauty that I determined to henceforth always hold dear.
Thank you. Thank you, Bahar. That was wonderful. I'm so glad you read that bit about the yellow walls not getting painted. So interesting because that was Van Gogh's favorite color, of course, and it's the most toxic of all of the pigments in the paint palette. So I love that you read that bit. Thank you. Now, our next reader is my friend, Ken Victor. And Ken moved to Canada full-time from the States in 1990 after spending many summers guiding canoe trips in northwestern Ontario. His poetry has appeared in numerous literary journals in both Canada and the US, and he's received a National Magazine Award and been featured on Verse Daily. We Were Like Everyone Else is Ken's first book, and it's the book of a lifetime, brimming with wisdom and humility. This collection, while personal and particular, will remind you time and again of our common humanity, that we are indeed like everyone else. Please welcome Ken.
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, Versefest. I also just have to tell you, I am so thrilled to be following you, Bahar, because the three poems I'm starting out with are all sort of connected with health and the medical system. So it's just a lovely continuity. So I'm going to start with a poem that's about birth, the birth of my daughter, and then I'm going to read a poem about the death of my father, and the rest of the poems will all fit between birth and death. Sorcery. Daughter, they came for you, the white-robed witches of the incubator kingdom. They came with their voodoo and vocabulary. They came to slice open the weakened home your mother had grown for 6 months. Some came to kickstart your Thumbelina lungs. Some claim to claim the desiccated placenta you drank dry. Days before, with their magical gadgetry, with their mumbled incantations, they scanned you for their omen of death, blood flowing back through your thin umbilicus into your prostrate mother. Sweet little one, when you were born, you had 2.5 tablespoons of blood, skin like wax paper, a body my palm could eclipse. In seconds, I threw away my faith, signed off on all their magic. I sought their oracles, recited their sorcery to anyone who'd listen. And later, they came for me, daughter, came for my blood, named me the match, bequeathing you my manic energy, my sleepless nights, this river of desires you could drown in. The white-robed witches of the incubator kingdom bargained with the other side, daughter, and won. And you were released to us here in the bright light, the heat lamps keeping you warm, the oxygen tanks stoking your breath, sustenance traveling through tubes as fine as angel's hair. Sweet little one, the white-robed witches of the incubator kingdom kept you from leaving. The rest is up to you and your own witches, your own magic, your own vocabulary of transcendence. Speak, daughter, when you're ready. Welcome whatever sorceries will save you. Colon. Ascending colon, as in that part of the large intestine which carries feces from the cecum to the transverse colon. colon, as in those two dots, one above the other, signaling something's to follow. Pay attention. Which came first, colon or colon? And cancer of the colon? I thought it a disease of grammarians. When it had metastasized to the brain and nothing more could be done, they tossed his billable body onto the gurney, wheeling him down the hall for a 3 a.m. scan. I flew down to Boston. He'll stay here, I told the physician, over my dead body. Home, I placed a baby intercom by his bed. For pain, I slapped a morphine patch on his upper arm. Come morning, his Texas catheter delivered a bag of urine colored the honey of killer bees. When his own father died, he mailed me a note, a letter, a meditation. I don't know what to call it. An 8.5 by 11, folded crisp as his suit pants. Open it up. On the very top, he wrote, from dust, then a long, elegant line to the bottom, unto dust. So what was the point? Our last conversation, you think it was about gratitude or apology or advice? The water pump in the basement needed replacing. Get a Bell and Gossett, he said. Instructions for changing the colostomy bag of a loved one. Change at least 2 times per week or when the excrement leaks. Wash your hands. Clean the area. Pretend you're an auto mechanic. The hospice volunteer. See the toes turning purple? Not long now, that's the sign. He shut down from extremities to core as if his heart were a dimmer switch. The body in repose. Can I call it repose? Let me call it repose. Tubes, patches, bags. How quickly the palace of everything we are closes. Notes on the technologies of depression. 1. What makes me valid? Actually, I mean, what makes me valid? 2. Is it a dark tunnel, a cave, a bottomless well, a computer caught in perpetual reboot? Barry, my friendly computer engineer, lived there with me, declared his motherboard shot. 3. At breakfast, my 4-year-old asks, what's fragile mean, Daddy? It means it can break easily, Sasha. Like plates, Daddy? 4. 3 days before his minutely planned Easter Day suicide, Barry asked me to write him a job recommendation. It sits on my desk, Song for a Ghost. 5. Gratitude has become the most important bone in my body. No matter how lonely I become, it's the one rib I'll never give away. 6. At first, Barry said when they adjusted his meds, it was as if he had new software. Actually, he said, Doc's a genius programmer, like me. 7. Moods hold me now, for days, weeks sometimes. It's a light sentence, like the county jail. You know you'll be getting out. 8. Being, wallowing in being, is easy if you're doing poorly. But do well, and it's all do. Derail those locomotives at your own risk. 9. Later, he sent a postcard, a picture of the ENIAC, the world's first computer, enormous fungus filling the university's basement. His handwritten note on the back, Doc's written me some new code, seems full of bugs. 10. When I feel myself falling, I go where I've always gone, out there, wherever the sky seems to reach down for the horizon, into the one amphitheater large enough to hold my thoughts up, and remember that Barry's bipolar haiku, his title, doesn't say you have to enter. A revolving door. On one side, crazy heaven. The other, empty. I'm going to read the poem from where the title of the book, the title of the collection comes from, which is We Were Like Everyone Else. To the unborn historians, the history of the present moment will be written by you, much as we might want to claim it for ourselves. One day, our time will call out to you, and like a birder in a thick forest hearing a song thought long extinct, you'll stop, listen, decide to linger a while to hear if the song has a story. We'll shift from paper gave way to zeros and ones, culture to commerce. Unless you're willing to dumpster dive in our time, you'll likely lose your way chronicling the folly of our fools. As to us, here's hoping you'll find a clipping, a shred, a bit of our cosmic dander to tease out a plausible explanation. We know your telling will be an earnest telling, well meant and mostly. You want to surmise something from our shards? Surmise this. We were like everyone else. It was about food and shelter, the hunt for some scraps of meaning. Whatever you'll say about us, we would love to help, but you are out of earshot and we are too far for shouting. For the last poem, I'll read one that strikes me as particularly resonant with what we've been observing in the US the past little bit. Just like us. They were them because they weren't us. We were us because whatever we weren't them. We wouldn't let them be us, even if they wanted to, which they didn't, because they weren't us. Did we hate them? Of course we hated them, because they hated us for not being them, which we didn't want to be, even if they let us. Us meant all of us. We knew who we were. And them meant all of them. They knew who they were. How did they know who they were? From us, who knew who we were from them. That's why, and we don't say this, we need them. We need them to give us, us. And in return, we become them to them, so they can be in us, just like us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. That was a really poignant reading and a perfect poem to close on. We're going to have to talk about that later. And now I'd like to introduce our final reader, Piri. And Pearl barely needs an introduction in the National Capital Region, being an integral part of the poetry community here. Her poems have been included in Best Canadian Poetry at least twice, possibly thrice, I'm not sure. She is the winner of the Robert Croach Award for her second book, Thirst, and the recipient of the Lampman Prize for her third collection, The Pet Radish Shrunken. Footlights is Pearl's most recent book, her fourth, and it marks a significant stylistic departure from her other work, which is so interesting. In this book, she explores new terrain with poems that are at once lyrical and accessible, and they're illuminated with a mysterious light. So I'd like you to welcome Pearl Pirie.
Thank you. Let me make sure yes, I'm audible. Thank you, Jenny. And thank you, Bahar and Ken, for those readings. That really got us off to a great start. Some of my poems are also medically related, but I'll start with one that is about healing. Adaptive. It makes sense that a pear bruises. Its biggest bump used to be the ground. for seeds to release. Now analogy fails. Mammals don't sprout from broken ribs. Injury has its own lessons. It says, wrap yourself in soft cotton. It says, be gentler than your habit. Watch for those who may pile on canned answers, solutions. As we heal, let's breathe. Incant how we ascend past biology, where breeze, hornet, and stem enable tension. And from what poem that's the title came from, the saplings are yellow as footlights in the forest. How to deny the season when stoking a wood fire? The foot is forgetting sandals, while beside the thumbs, paddle calluses thin. Father's birthday is a week past. I gaze at the calendar, lower without a word. Then I should say, clouds moved across the sun, smoothing away any harsh shadows. Then night swallowed evening's curves. But that would be tidy. And outside drizzle and sun collects in the shallow scoop of the garden shovel again. Time to go out. Rinse and dry. Care for my mood as I would for my tool. Plumbing. And this was written at, okay, I'll remember it in a moment. Plumbing. The guest cabin's dimensions are those of Thoreau's. The boards and logs rough-hewn. There's a sink with a tube to a bucket, plastic keg of water, which forms a modern luck of birth. Spring blossoms white. The diva cup is full. Squatting to pinch it out, it spills into the thirsty floor. A sin, a repenting. I have made a blood sacrifice, yet feel guilt more keenly than before. I scrub, but it's absorbed. I pour water, the water stains, worse. Watermarks, a ripple in the grain. The tree still feels the season. Spring bursts a bead of sap from cut limbs, immortal pine. And it doesn't matter how many times you read, your bookmark still falls out. Ah, dear me, there it is. Sleeping with head injuries. The chair's back is more straight than mine. My head-heavy spine droops. His road burn looks like a rash scraped under the forearm skin. In ICU, the world is a pump swish, quiet with rainbow vials for blood. I want to photograph those hands between nurses and neurologists. You say it's uncouth somehow. Those hands, black ground into them, dirt under the nails, long and ragged, from working baler twine and wire. On the sly, I photographed my case. Number machines creating patterns. Next time I watch those sleeping hands, they have thinned, been scrubbed, nails trimmed, wrist cool to the touch, rough hacks moisturized out or healed. All of the arthritis disappeared in weeks of not pushing, Sisyphus against pain. Fine, smooth, whitened glove palms of a gentleman like his own father's. Friends. Those crevices of silence wedged between flight and sound by Wisława Szymborska. Stand closer. Don't keep this polite fissure. Moss Takes years. Ferns, trees, will bridge this space between our pelvises. Press in with the weight of your attention. Collapse towards me, one point of hip, then the other. Rest with me, shoulders stable, lean. Let's make of us a hibernaculum for snakes to find. Pin to our heels. Let's spin our shadows, long donkey tails, pinned on each of us. I love 2 hours before sunset for its reversals. The limp hydro wires reflect as if white. At night, driving up Canada's Hill, Ottawa is a fallen star field. And our collective petty sparks usurp the glory of sky. The bigger, small questions. At chapters, I know, sorry. I asked the clerk where the poetry was. She flubbed off. Poetry is everywhere. Dear sweet lady, that's not useful for my question. Your chaste triage fills my puppy gaze. I compare you to a sanctuary. Your polka dots of skulls are a fabric we could dance to, but not right now. Direct me to the geese migrating north, all these high rises, lights and signs addle. Like me and the oldest species on earth, we can't leave soon enough. Shadows point everywhere from fluorescent bulbs. Confused, they can't bloom. The slats around compost and rot. And 2 poems. One is very short, Bath Time Lessons. Online, he narrated the photo of his 4-year-old in the bath. He said, "Daddy, don't put my photo on the internet." But he did. And as if it were me, my cartoon Avenger self rose to her feet. Sometimes I am covered in triggers. Sometimes I forget I'm a gun. And lastly, in the room grown dark, there's something that isn't intention. As surely as anything has atoms or fields or vibrations, there's a pressing. The ears, filled with silence, want more of what they have. Unplugging the space heater, a blue reaches back as the gap between plug and outlet increase. The small lit flare looks like panic. It isn't. The arc completed seems like success. It isn't. It falters at holding the connection with you. But even electricity wants to continue.
Thank you so much, Pearl.
Thank
that
you.
was wonderful. It was just wonderful, and I love seeing the connections in all of your work. We'll have to go on and discuss this. In fact, our next segment is going to be a Q&A. But first of all, let's have a round of applause, I guess a virtual one for our readers. Yay. I don't know if you can hear me or the entire crowd. Well, that was just wonderful. So now, I guess moving on to our Q&A. I'm going to begin by asking a few questions, but if you'd like to pose a question for our poets, you may do so. All you have to do is click on the comments function on the bottom of your screen, And you can type in a few words and then hit enter. And we may invite you to unmute your mic and ask the question yourself. So I will leave that to Avonlea to figure out. And so as I say, while you're thinking of your questions, I'm going to ask the poets my questions. And the first question I have is for Bahar, and this is it. In your book, you foreground the primacy of physical touch and connection. In fact, at the end, you literally merge with your lover. My skin, your walls, you write. My voice, your roof. Throughout the collection, as a medical student, you encounter bodies and feel a different kind of awe. Describe yourself as frozen with anxiety and astonishment. Can you talk about these two different points of view, the lovers and the clinicians, and how they're connected? Over to you, Bahar.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that question, Jenny. I mean, I guess, you know, one kind of central question to the book, or one question that was really important to me while I was writing, was what would it mean to take a politics of care really seriously? What would that mean for our world? What would that mean for healthcare? And the lover's realm, or the realm of romantic intimacy, and the world of the medical establishment, these were both kind of placed, like, really interesting and complex places to kind of conceive of that question. And I mean, I guess on the one hand, the lover's world, I feel like there are lots of kind of assumptions that could be a place of total care or total beauty. And we know that that's not true, and that you know, that the lover's world can be a place of violence, or it can be a place of, you know, many failures of intimacy. And so I wanted to kind of unsettle some of those assumptions, or grapple with them and see what that could kind of mean. And then on the other hand, in terms of the medical world, I mean, we also know that the medical establishment is another place of, you know, so much violence and so much neglect. And as medical students, or as, you know, physicians in training, we're kind of taught that no other way is possible, that alternatives are not, you know, are unimaginable. But at the same time, you know, in spite of and against and outside of the world of violence, the world of medical violence, it's possible to kind of glimpse care and beauty and intimacy. And I guess you know, in the book, I kind of wanted to attend to that, because those glimpses, you know, they invite us to radically kind of reimagine healthcare. So these were kind of the things that I was holding. I don't know if that answers the question, but these are things that I was thinking about when I was writing.
Some frightening thoughts there, for sure. Medical violence, what a horrifying phrase. We might get back to that, actually, but now I'd like to ask Ken a question, and then Pearl, and then we'll start to have a look and see if there's some questions from the audience. So for Ken, here's your question, Ken. In your masterful poem, Colon, you explore the intimacies of care, as well as the mechanics of the body. There are too many beautiful lines to quote, but I'll just say I gasped when I read, "He shut down from extremities to core, as if his heart were a dimmer switch." Can you talk about this personal poem and how it came to be, Ken?
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks for your appreciation of the poem. That poem is about, I spent the last month of my father's life with him. And in that time, I had to write, I just had to verbalize on the page what I was going through, what I was experiencing. It wasn't about poetry. It was just like, I need to process what this time was about. And it took me literally years before I came back to that time and that experience before I could almost emotionally go back into it and try to decipher what that was about. And so there were so many moments and so many images, and I just would keep writing them. And it came to a point of, it was just like, where am I in this? What was this for me? And it was about, peeling the onion to what I was trying to get at, and landing with a few things that felt like this was that experience for me. And it was actually, that poem was actually, in its own way, it was very healing for me in terms of my relationship to that experience. And I don't usually say that about poems, but very clearly this poem was that.
Can you tell everyone how the poem ends, your punctuation?
Oh, it ends with, so how quickly the palace of everything we are closes, :
Yeah, for some reason you have to really experience that poem on the page too, I think. As hearing you read it is exquisite, but the two would work beautifully together.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's so interesting because Bahar's poems, she's really the carer, and you're a carer for a family member in this particular situation. And now I'm going to ask Pearl a question about the body and her relationship to her own body. So Pearl, here is your question, and then we'll open it up and see what everyone else has to say. So Pearl, my favorite poem in your collection, Footlights, as you know, is Plumbing, and I asked you to read it, and you did. Thank you so much. And in this poem, you are a guest staying in a cabin that has the same dimensions as Thoreau's, so I guess it's small. And you spill the contents of your diva cup all over the unfinished pine floor in the bathroom. I love the way you juxtapose these two things. Thoreau's cabin, which for me is a symbol of a particularly masculine kind of rugged individualism, and then your menstrual blood, which is a rather intimate female spilling. So I really love that contradiction. And I also admire the way you explore the metaphor of plumbing itself. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that poem and perhaps see if I've overanalyzed it. Over to you, Pearl.
Well, overanalyzing is good. I mean, you take things apart and then you see different things. That's part of what the beauty of language is and poetry, in another view coming in. This poem was in the Gus Minstrel Anthology, which came out, I have no sense of time, during COVID, let's say 2 years ago. It might be a year ago, it might be longer, I don't know. And it took place, the Thoreau's cabin is at Fieldworks between Perth on the far side of Silver Lake. There's a number of little cabins that are built over the land that artists can use for mini retreats. And this was I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to be invited to do that. About a decade into them offering this program. And it was interesting to be in a place that is without plumbing, without anything, no other people, because it's not a cabin big enough for two. And basically that was like the second time that I'd ever been apart from my husband in like 29 years for more than like 12 hours or something. So, but I like the idea of
Oh, I was
what's
going
that?
to say, you really made a mess of cleaning up the blood, though. You had your Lady Macbeth moment. Out, damn spot.
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah. Well, it just spill, and when old wood gets moisture, all the grain pops up. So it's almost like the wood, however long it's been dead, it wants to live again and wicks up moisture. And even though the cabin was pretty old, still the pine in spring is releasing its sap. So it's like that connection between the dead and living and what we consider animate and inanimate Yeah, so I was thinking around these things, as well as how menstruation is never talked about in poems. Every poem, it seems, has men's parts, but women never bleed. So
It was such a surprise and a delight, that poem. I just loved it. And
excellent.
yeah, I've never seen a diva cup in a poem before. Yours is the first.
Excellent. Maybe I'll become a corporate sponsor for Diva.
No.
Get a poem in every little box.
I think we have some questions coming in. I'm just trying to read them here.
Yeah, we had a great question from Ian for Ken.
Okay.
Ian, if you want to unmute and ask your question out loud to Ken yourself, that would be great, if you're up for it.
Hi, everybody. Ken, when you introduced the poem about us versus them, you suggested that it was relevant in the context of the current political reality in the United States, which it certainly was. But I was curious, when you wrote it, or when you brought it into being, what was on your mind? What were you thinking about? What inspired it?
So it's a really interesting question, Ian. One of the things that occurs to me about that poem now, it's really meant to take almost an archetypal dynamic. And I realize that it's an archetypal dynamic that can be applied in many different contexts. In the context of the book, it's put in a section where there are a number of poems that are evoking Arab-Jewish tension. And so I think in the book, it's not, and it wasn't written with that in mind, but it slots into that place, and that's likely what people will project onto it. But I actually think when I pulled it out of that context and you apply it to other dynamics, it ends up being valid, which is one of the things I actually appreciate about that poem. I think you can read a number of different particulars into it.
Do we have any more questions, Avonlea?
Yeah, we did have one. Maurice, if you're comfortable, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question. This one's for all three of the poets. Or it looks like Maurice may not be able to unmute, so.
Could you
Okay.
ask the question?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and read it. So if you can, again, this is directed to all three of you, so feel free to chime in. If you can remember, what were the first words you penned in drafting the works you presented here today?
I guess I'll go first, since I'll give other people time to think. All the poems have been not done at the same time, but they've been scattered around, and there was no idea that it was ever to go into a work. It was just made because it needed to be made to process, as Ken described at the time. So there isn't any poem that's entire as it was isn't as it was originally made. They've all been edited and changed quite a lot. So yeah, that would be my answer on that one.
Ken or Bahar, did you want to tackle this one? It's a tough one.
I think actually the first word that I wrote, and that's still the first word of the book, is the word perhaps.
Interesting.
Yeah, and when I whenever I'm working on a piece of writing, whenever I add something new, I reread it again from the top. So I still remember, with every rereading, the first word was perhaps. And yeah, and I think it did feel like a reminder every time that this is, a work or writing that's going to live inside tentativeness or ambiguity or ambivalence. Yeah.
I love that word. I use it all the time, and it just speaks of a wonderful uncertainty that accompanies poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that you began that way and that you remember. It's amazing. What about you, Ken? What were your first words?
The only one that I have any memory of what it began with was the one sorcery, where I remembered I had the language or the phrase, the white-robed witches of the incubator kingdom. And I don't know where that came from, but that came to me, and the rest evolved from that image. But I can rarely remember where my poems begin.
That's so interesting. So you're not sure what inspires you, or do you have to write a long time before you find the right words, or do you suddenly have a sort of an electrifying jolt of inspiration? Which is it?
Right. Every once in a great, who was it? Randall Jarrell, who said any great poet gets struck by lightning 5 times in their life. That qualifies you as being a great poet. I've maybe been almost struck half a time. You know, it's that sort of thing. So no, it takes me forever to write. That's why a book didn't come out till I'm in my 60s, Jenny.
I wasn't trying to point that out. I'm the same way. My book came out in my 40s. So yeah, Bahar is not of our school of thought, clearly. Oh dear. Are there any more questions or any more comments?
Yeah, it looks like we just got one from Vivian. Vivian, if you wanted to unmute and ask your question, you can feel free, or I can read it if you prefer.
I was hoping you'd read it.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
So Vivian, first of all, starts off by thanking all the poets who are performing tonight. It seems like she has a question for Bahar. I can see how your experiences in the medical world impact your poems. How does being a poet impact your work as a physician, or does it? I would appreciate someone else reading this, and that's me. I'm reading my own bit. So once again, Bahar, if you want to take that away, if you have thoughts about it.
I mean, the first thing that's coming to my mind that I kind of feel that I know to be true is, I think being committed to writing and to poetry helps me to stay attentive to the world, and to stay attentive to like my medical practice, and that attentiveness can so easily get away from you in the world of medicine, which, you know, can be very fast-paced, very structured, very rigid, becomes very kind of normalized in its own ideologies. And so, yeah, I think that the attentiveness piece does impact the work, or I feel like it does. I don't know. It's true.
I think it would be great if more doctors did some training in poetry or literature. Yeah, to, I don't know, to nurture some compassion. So I'm really glad you're out there in the world working as a doctor, Bahar, that's for sure. Bringing poetry.
Can I mention something to Bahar?
Yeah.
So Bahar, when you mentioned the medical violence, I didn't have this language for it, but as soon as you did that, I thought that little moment in the poem Colon, where my father is wheeled down at 3 a.m. to get a procedure so that the hospital makes it a billable, it suddenly felt like, ooh, that's medical violence. And I hadn't used that language for it, but it just fits.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, we're seeing that, you know, now more acutely than ever, you know, the importance of capital over people's lives, which I think you're naming here.
Too true. I am thinking that if we're to stay on schedule, we're probably running out of time. Is there a last question, Avonlea, or question or two?
No, I just see thanks and appreciation in the chat, which I think is a pretty good sign.
That is just lovely. Well, on that note, I think it might be time to wrap things up because everyone's got a lot of screen fatigue. But before we sign off, I'd like to say a few thank yous. First of all, thank you to all of our readers who were wonderful, and to Ken for joining us on such short notice. On that note, let's send out a get well wish to Sadiqa in case she's listening tonight. And another thank you to Perfect Books on Elgin Street. If you wish to buy any of these excellent books, and I recommend that you do buy them, you can get them there. I'd also like to thank the entire team at Versefest for working so hard under such difficult circumstances. And a special shout out to Monty Reed, our artistic director, and Avonlea Fotheringham, the festival administrator. Avonlea, we really appreciate you working behind the scenes. And then finally, I'd like to thank you out there for connecting with us this evening. And one last thing before I go, I'd like to remind you of the next Versefest event, our official welcome, featuring Albert Dumont, Anne-Marie Desmeaux, Kai Kello, and Karen Salee. And this reading takes place tomorrow evening at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Anything else you'd like to add, Avonlea? You don't need to register for that event, I don't believe.
No, the rest of our program, with the exception of our closing event, will take place online. So feel free to navigate to versefest.ca. You should be able to live stream all of those events as soon as they become available.
Perfect. Well, I guess that's it. And now I'd like to finally sign off and wish you all a good night. Sleep tight and take care, everyone.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Bahar and Ken and all. Good night.
Good night.